crash and burn.
Hey everyone, so tonight I wanted to talk about Metallica's Saint Anger, and I know that this is pretty much their most hated album, possibly next to Load and Reload. I didn't like Load and Reload myself. I felt like they just sort of went too far off the blueprint, and they were trying too many new things at once with those two albums. And I just never loved those records. But I feel that this record kind of got shortchanged, and I think that people hated it just because, like, the person beside them hated it, and they didn't want to have to stand on their own and defend it. Because I've loved this record since it came out back in, I think it was 2002. This was like Metallica returning to form. This was the fastest record that they had released since Injustice back in 88, I think, because they spent the entire 90s slowed down and playing for a much more mainstream sound. And it worked for them and everything. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's Metallica. In a sense, they can do no wrong, even though I will say the Load and Reload didn't exactly land. I felt that this record did land. I thought this record was perfect. The only song on here I don't love is Invisible Kid, and I don't hate it or anything, but it just didn't grab me. Every other song on here just puts the pedal to the floor, and it just does not let up. And I always felt personally that, like Some Kind of Monster, it reminded me so much of Master of Puppets without borrowing from Master of Puppets or copying Master of Puppets, that this was like a real return to form for Metallica, and including using Pushead, who by this point I believe is going by Uncle Pushead, to do the artwork for the album. I mean, this was just, everything for this album came together so well. I love how Lars's snare sounds. I know a lot of people took issue with that, but I liked Metallica having more of like, I guess, like an industrial snare. I don't want Metallica to ever try anything too new. I don't want them to introduce keyboards or anything, but having more of like a skinny puppy sound to their snare really worked for them on this album. And I know everybody hated the snare on this record, but I thought it was great. It was nice to see that the guys in Metallica, who in a lot of ways have always played it really safe, were willing to experiment at least somewhat. And the songs on here are so good. Like, I don't know why everybody took issue with the title track, Saint Anger. Like, I love that song. Like, I can listen to that song endlessly. Shoot Me Again's on here, All Within My Hands on here. I mean, Sweet Amber. I mean, what do you have against The Unnamed Feeling? That's one of the best songs Metallica have ever written and recorded. This record is so heavy, and it's so chunky, and it sounds like nothing else in the world, but at the same time, it does sound like Metallica. They're still incorporating what they learned on Load and Reload, but I find that on this album, it works a lot better than it did on Load and Reload. And they would continue to use that crunchiness that they picked up on Load and Reload right through on Death Magnetic, as well as Hardwired. But I think the real reason that this record was so hated was, like I said, it was just because somebody genuinely didn't like it, and the person standing next to them didn't want to get into a fight, so they're like, yeah, I hate it too. And then the person next to them said, yeah, I hate it too, and I hate it too. And nobody ever really gave the album a chance, because they started to reintroduce the songs from this record in their live act over the past few years, and people have responded really well to tracks like Frantic. And I know why, because Frantic fucking kicks ass. It always has. It's kicked ass since 2002 when it was released on this album. But back then, everybody was like, oh, this is terrible, this is garbage, the snare's awful, the sound is brutal, the production's shit. No. Everything about this album was perfect. This was Metallica kind of finding themselves again and hitting really hard. I mean, I liked everything about this album. James's other voice that he goes into, I thought it was cool, but it's not James. So I could see where people were sort of lost with that. I kind of agreed with that. I still thought him going to a higher, screechier voice was very cool and very progressive, I suppose. But it wasn't him, and I'm glad that he didn't stick with that. I don't know. This record was awesome. And it came out at a time, too, back in the early 2000s when metal was sort of stagnant and sort of like meh. So for Metallica, who've been around forever at this point, to do something so fresh and so exciting, and who are willing to take like so many chances with this album, it was really welcoming to see that they had the balls to do that this late in their career. And it's too bad that it took this long for people to sort of come around to the album, because this album has always been amazing. It's nuts. Like, this record is crazy. It's got the biggest drums, the biggest bass, the thickest guitars. This is like the biggest record Metallica has ever made. And I just don't get what people had, what their problem was with that. It never made sense to me. I thought the songs were fun, well-written, and catchy as fuck. Especially the Unnamed Feeling. So, yeah. So I'm going to go. So thank you so much for hanging out with me while I discussed Metallica's much-hated Saint Anger from back in, I believe, 2002. If you like this review, don't forget to do something nice for somebody, and I will see you guys soon. Have a good night. I just wanted to say thank you for making it through the entire video. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to remind everyone one more time, even though I've probably already done this in the video that you just watched, to please click the like button as well as the subscribe button because it helps this channel grow. And thank you for hitting like and subscribe, and we will see you guys really soon.